AskReddit. Serious, what's the creepiest true story that happened to you or someone you know? I just moved into a basement suite. Every time I went out, I would lock the deadbolt but not the door handle, but when I came home a lot of the time the deadbolt would be unlocked, and the door handle would be locked. At first, I thought I was just confused about which one I had locked, so I started paying more attention. It kept happening, and I realized someone must be going in when I went out. I assumed it was the landlady and was annoyed, but didn't say anything at first. Then one day I came home and found the wrong lock locked again. I went in pissed off, and opened the fridge to get something to eat. There was a book in the fridge that I had never seen before. I collected old books, and this one was published in the early 1900s, which creeped me out completely, because it was like it had been left for me. I finally called my landlady, and asked if she was going into my apartment, and told her what had happened. She freaked right out, said the last person who lived there was a really creepy guy with mental health and drug problems. She got all the locks changed that day and it never happened again. Didn't realize until years later that I was almost snatched. Grew up in a small town. Out playing in the yard with my two younger siblings like every other summer day. Guy pulls up alongside the yard in a truck, calls me over, asks my name, if I'm having a good summer. He says he could really use my help. He's out looking for his lost puppy. He can show me a photo of the puppy if I come closer. No, closer. The picture is small. Can I please help him? I yell to my brother on the other side of the yard, Darren, come help us find a puppy. I have to assume he thought I yelled Dad, because he nope/screeched out of there without another word. I remember being really worried about that puppy. Until we had an assembly at our primary school about things strangers might say to lure you into their vehicles. When I was about 9 or 10, my older brother and I had a few friends over to stay the night. My dad had to work the next day, so we were all left at the house by ourselves for the day. We were excited to play PlayStation all day on our Saturday off. Well, my dad worked late that night, until probably 8 or 9. As soon as the sun went down we went into one of the rooms upstairs to play Uno. Fast forward 30 minutes, and we start hearing footsteps slowing walking up the wooden stairs. My dad wasn't going to be home for another 2 hours, so we didn't know who it was. There were 4 of us, me, my brother, my friend, and his friend. We would take turns walking out of the room to see what it was, but before we could look down the dark stairs we would hear what sounded like someone running down the stairs as fast as they could, so they couldn't be seen. This continued for probably 2 hours, ending with all of us huddled in the room upstairs with the door wedged shut with a chair until my dad got home. None of us were really believers in anything paranormal, but a child's imagination is a crazy thing. Now 15 years later, I still don't know what to make of it, but every one of us heard those footsteps walking up those dark stairs. I bring it up to my friend who I'm still friends with, and he remembers it just as vividly as I do. It kind of creeps me out just thinking about it. Might have just been a persistent thief. Or a reluctant serial killer. Either one. This happened to a friend of mine. It's a Sunday. She comes home to her apartment from running errands around 1 PM. She was in med school at this time, so she pretty much parked herself at the kitchen table and studied for the next 5-6 hours. She's sitting there and looks up to see a dude casually stroll out of her bedroom. No other entrances, she's sitting by the front door, so he's been there the entire time she has been home. He pauses at the doorway to her kitchen, between her and the door. She basically froze. Then her phone rang and kind of startled both of them. She ran to get the phone. He ran out the door. She moved and got an enormous dog. He was in her apartment the whole time. This is one of my biggest fears. When I was a child, I was always stricken by this irrational fear that when I went outside at night, I had to walk straight into the house without looking back, because if I looked back, someone would be following me. One day after dinner I went out to the car to get my book bag, and I was continuing my ritual of walking straight inside without looking back, adrenaline pumping, anxiety going full force, and I just stopped and said to myself, this is stupid. I made myself look back. When I looked back, I saw what appeared to be someone crouched down behind my mom's car and was peeking their head around. They were just staring at me and smiling. It appeared to be a woman in her mid-30s, maybe 40, with curly short blonde hair. We made eye contact for a second, and then she ducked back behind the car where I couldn't see her. I stood frozen for a second and then ran inside. I told my mom. We went outside to check. No one was there. My mom didn't exactly not believe me, but she wasn't very concerned either. My mom and her friend were out and about late at night, heading to a party. Their car broke down, and being a rural town with a small population, they had to walk about a mile to the nearest house for help. They got to the front door, and of all people to answer the door, it was one of their high school teachers. He was horrified to see them out late at night, alone. He let them use his phone but scolded them, saying it was not safe, the location, time and circumstances. He let them know they were absolute fools, and he did a somewhat vague warning. My mom called my grandfather to come bring gas and or possibly tow their vehicle. When the girls got back to their car, there was a severed cow head on the hood, blood everywhere. This was near Hermiston, Oregon, apparently well known for devil worshippers. Posted this before. Also my top comment of all time. Rented a cabin for a week with my significant other. First night there, we had spent the day visiting her family. The actual reason for our trip, had dinner. She got pretty wasted. Get back to the cabin. Carry my significant other inside. To find all our bags open/dumped onto the floor. This set me into panic mode. I hadn't been drinking and I routinely carry, so I pull out my gun and sweep the house. I check every room, closets, even under the bed. Nothing. My significant other is still fast asleep, so I check our stuff over and there's nothing missing. It had just been dumped onto the floor. So I look around some more. All the windows are locked. The back door was even dead bolted. It just really bothered me that there was no sign of break-in. I know I locked the place before I left, so either someone else had a key to my cabin, or whoever it was still inside the cabin. Either way, I didn't think I'd do much sleeping. It was too late to make other arrangements, and considering that most likely there wasn't anything to worry about really. We had been gone all day, from 9 AM to midnight. So odds whoever it was did it was probably way earlier. But still, I couldn't shake it. I went in and covered up my significant other, used the bathroom, set up a rocking chair facing the front door, my hand on my gun on my lap. I started watch. I felt pretty silly sitting there, but I couldn't not sit there either. And sometime around 3-4 AM, I fell asleep. I woke up the next morning around 7 AM, sun shining through. I actually half scared myself because I hadn't meant to fall asleep, which then scared me again because I wasn't holding my gun. I start looking around, and on the couch is my gun. I'm like, what? Then I look, the front door is wide open. I'm like, no ducking way. I jump up and start running to check on my significant other. Thank God she was still there, untouched. I go back out into the living room and pick up my gun. All my bullets are missing. I go outside and look around. Car and everything is still there, no signs of anybody. I walk back inside, look in the far corner of the living room, and I see the corner of the main living room rug lifted up. I investigate. It's covering the opening to the crawl space. That means this guy was in my cabin the entire time. I must have pulled up and caught the guy in the act. He thought fast and hid in the crawl space. Then sometime during the night, crawled out, disarmed me, and walked right out the front door. TLDR, rented a cabin, came back for the night, found our stuff dumped on the floor. Put my significant other to bed, stayed in the living room with my gun in case they came back. Fell asleep. Woke up the next morning to find my gun on the couch, a hidden crawl space door open, and the front door open. The person was hiding in the crawl space the entire time, and worse, came out while I was sleeping and disarmed me. I love to ride my bike along country roads. Not far from where I live is a tiny town called Three Oaks, in Michigan. One Saturday, my wife was working and I had nothing to do, so I strapped my bike to my car and drove the hour to Three Oaks. I parked in the scenic downtown area and then rode out of the town and into the surrounding countryside. As I wound my way further into the remote countryside, houses and businesses and cars grew increasingly scarce. Eventually, there were only an occasional house or two every half mile or mile, and cornfields, and small woods flanking the dirt and gravel roads that I pedaled down. It's on one of those back roads that a minivan drove past me. Within moments of it passing, it turned around, pulled up alongside me. I looked over and the passenger, a woman in her mid to late 20s, was looking at me with her window down. The driver, a man of seemingly the same age, leaned over the passenger and said to me in a slight southern drawl, and with a big smile on his face, "Hey, do you know David Christ?" I thought for a brief second, but I don't know any David Christ, so I said so. The driver said, "You don't know of him at all?" I said that I didn't and apologized, and then pedaled on. The van sat for a moment longer and then pulled a U-turn, and drove off in the direction it was originally heading. I thought nothing of the encounter. Maybe the driver was a friend of David Christ, and he thought we had met though David or something. I don't know. At the time, I didn't think I had any reason to worry. I continued on my ride, turning down this road and heading north, and then turning down that road and heading east. I didn't have any agenda. I was just out to enjoy the summer day and meander through the relaxing countryside. Maybe 10 minutes later, and on an entirely new road, and heading an entirely different direction from the one I had first met the van, I saw the van again. We were heading toward each other, and I gave a smile and nod as I passed the driver. I remember thinking it was an odd coincidence that I should come across this van again. The driver stared as he passed, and he had a big smile on his face. At this point, I began wondering what they were doing. They might be lost and looking for this David Christ guy, or maybe they're just enjoying a scenic drive and thought I looked like a friend of a friend, or something. I didn't know, but at that point I was starting to think about the situation a little more critically. I continued taking a twisting, turning, meandering path. Taking this road, and then turning onto that, heading north, south, west, east. Then, I came across the van again. Again, they're heading in my direction, and I pulled alongside them. The driver rolled down his window and leaned out. He was a late 20s white man, with a few inches of a goatee and a baseball cap. He had a large smile plastered across his face again. I stopped my bike and looked at him, waiting for him to say something, and he just looked at me for a good 30 seconds. Now, 30 seconds doesn't sound like a long time, but you go flag down a stranger and then just look at them for 30 seconds, and you'll realize that, in that kind of situation, 30 seconds is a lifetime. Finally, he spoke and said, "Hey, do you know David Christ?" Same damn question. This time there was no smile on his face. He stared at me, and I was thinking to myself, is he joking? Does he really not remember he asked me this same question 20 minutes ago? Is he just being funny? Is he high as hell? After a moment, I told him that I still didn't know anyone by the name of David Christ, and I pedaled off down the road. It's at that time that I realized exactly in how remote of an area I was. I peered down the road I was on, and I didn't see a house on its entire length. I was flanked by a cornfield on one side and a forest on the other. I looked over my shoulder and saw the van slowly driving down the road away from me. It couldn't be a coincidence that I came across this van 3 times now, not with me taking random roads heading different directions. It made no sense why anyone driving would take that same maze of roads. The only thing they could have been doing was just driving around, maybe a pleasure drive, but why would they stop me and ask that same question twice? It was quite strange, and I was beginning to become a little concerned. I decided to begin to head back toward the town center. I pedaled hard, and the gravel road ahead of me continued with a bend to the right, and a dirt path, for it couldn't really be called a road, to the left. As I neared the fork, who should come around the bend but the damned van? I gripped my pocket knife, which I always take with me on rides like this, just in case, and then realized, all they would have to do is run me down with the van, and I would be in serious trouble. As the van drew closer, I was ready to jump off and run into the cornfields. The van slowed down as it approached me, and the driver rolled his window down and leaned out again, but this time I didn't stop riding. I increased my speed, even though I knew I could never outrun the van if they gave chase. I looked over my shoulder and saw the van sitting in the middle of the road. I took the right fork and continued on the gravel road until I could no longer see the van behind the corn rows, and then I stopped. I got off my bike and crept along the cornfield until I was at its edge, and I peeked down the road I had just been on. The van was in the distance driving away from me. I ran back to my bike, and then as soon as the van was entirely out of sight, I turned around and took the left fork along the dirt path. I rode as fast I could, knowing that if the people in the van had nefarious things in mind, and if they caught me on this dirt path, flanked by cornfields and far from an area that anyone would come across us, that would be the time they attacked. My ruse worked, or perhaps the van was never after me at all, and I made it the rest of the way to the town center without seeing them again. When I got home later that day, I was still replaying the events in my head, and the name David Crist kept creeping through my mind. Was David Crist someone famous? I wondered, like a musician. Should I have known David Crist? I decided to Google a name. I tried a couple of different spellings for Crist, but in the Crist spelling that revealed a terrifying result. I came across a newspaper article from Knoxville, Tennessee. The article explained how a man named David Crist had turned himself in after stabbing another man at a gas station in 2013. The article included a photo of this criminal David Crist, and I believe it was the same man that was driving the van. Had a baseball cap and a few inches of a goatee, and the man in the van was a dead ringer for David Crist in the article. I did an inmate search of the Knox Country Prison, and there was no David Crist in the inmate population. Somehow David Crist had gotten out of prison, or maybe he was never convicted, as I couldn't find any articles about sentencing, in less than 2 years after stabbing a guy, and for some reason he had made his way to Michigan. Why was he driving along these back roads? Who was the woman in the passenger seat, and why the hell did he keep asking if I knew of him? Do I know David Crist? Yes, I do now.